That's a pretty good question. For some reason, in 55 and 56, they used only a hook style, or it was kind of a little dip in the arm that the blade snapped onto. Now in 57, apparently GM maybe was using more than one company for doing the blades and arms, and so somehow all of your vacuum style windshield wipers came with the hook dip style arm, and all of your electric stuff came with a straight arm. So you have to know, at least on 57s, which style you have, because the blades will not work vice versa. They'll seem to hook on, but the first time you turn on the wipers, the blades are going to come flying off the arms, I guarantee you.
Okay, we do have a couple more. This one is from Marcus. He says, how do I install headers with a 3/4 inch forward using a 500 box without the headers actually hitting the box?
Actually, the headers are going to have to be designed for that application. You have to really closely pay attention to the footnotes on people's headers. If it's not designed for the motor, if it has no footnotes, or it might even tell you it does not work with 3/4 inch front mounts, you need to double check that stuff, because you're going to struggle. You're going to be using a ball peen hammer on them to get them to fit. 500 series box, it is a little tighter, but in other ways it's kind of bulky too. The old 605 box is what a lot of these manufacturers were using to design the headers. So the first thing is the 605 may work, but not always the 500. The 500 is a little bit more square on top. So if the header tube was designed to go up next to a radius of the 605, then when you go put it next to a 500 that's more squared off, one of the tubes may actually hit. We have that trouble with the tri-wide design headers, where one of the tubes would clear a 605 grade, but with a 500 box it's too close to be able to, you can get it to work in the stock location, but not in the 3/4 inch forward location.
Okay, I have our first question today from Ruben Torres. How to change felts on the flippers on a 2-door hardtop? What's the best way?
Well, that's actually probably the biggest challenge on those. From what I understand, there has been a few guys that rebuild them. I believe they have made a tool actually to uncrimp the one side, and you got one side of the flipper that's crimped in, you got the other side that's actually attached to a piece of sheet metal, and then that piece of sheet metal is I believe both crimped and has rivets going through it. So they probably have a tool that easily gets it uncrimped so you don't warp the flipper, and then they got a tool to roll that lip back over. So no, it's not going to be easy. Your best bet, if you can carefully somehow uncrimp it and slide it out with the least amount of bending of that stainless, or you're going to end up making it all ripply. I personally have not seen these tools that these guys are using to restore them, but there is other ways that people have done it over the years. More just razor blading the old fur out, and maybe using contact cement to put the new ones on over the top of where the old fur used to be, instead of having to uncrimp stuff.
Okay, perfect. I have another question from Greg. It says, my fuel line that runs up the passenger side on my 57-210 with a 283 stops right about middle of the block. Is that right of stock? How close should the fuel line be from the fuel pump?
That hard line actually would jump over the idler arm support bracket, And as soon as it goes up over that bracket, it's probably only another 3 or 4 inches in front of that. So the original hose is not very long. I think that hose is probably about 6 inches long, and so that hard line needs to be far enough forward so the factory length hose can reach over to the mechanical pump. But yeah, it's got to be right on the money to make that work. I don't know, maybe we can get you a picture of like what a factory one looks like.
I do have a question from a guy named Alan. It's non-tech related, but Alan, this one's for you. You're asking about shipping to Canada, and the answer is yes, we do ship to Canada. If you can please call our customer service department, they'll walk you through the process and be able to tell you exactly what to do for Canada shipping. So just to give you a heads up, yes, we do ship to Canada, and they will definitely be able to help you out on that question, any questions you have for Canada. Okay, next question is, I know that the 55, 56, and 57s did not come standard with seat belts. I recently bought seat belts, not from you guys, but from somebody else. But you guys offer a seat belt installation kit. Is it worthwhile drilling holes, or should I put 3-point lap belts in?
Well, they did offer seat belts in those years as an accessory, dealer installed. In 57, they did have in the accessory manual measurements that the dealer was supposed to go by. I don't always use the exact measurements, but I do go by their instructions. You can, so the instructions do have you just use bolts, very, very large washers, the stuff that's in our kit. So you can use the accessory manual as a guideline. I believe we also have it on our website, but I've been told that you can't magnify the numbers big enough, so we may have to email you a copy of it. But it's, you know, sometimes even with the seat belts, you get instructions to kind of basically tell you, don't ever put 2 belts on the same bolt. It's unsafe. And having the bolts far enough apart from each other to make it safer as well, so the sheet metal is a little stronger that way. But yes, the accessory belts from Chevrolet did just bolt right through the floor with you know, good grade 8 bolts. So there's no problem with that. That's the way you're going to have to do it unless you want. Now the 3-point seat belts, you're asking, those are only going to be best in a sedan or a station wagon, or even a Nomad would be okay. But in sport coupes and convertibles, there's nowhere really good to anchor the 3-point on the belt. It's you would almost have to mount it all the way to the roof, which is not what most people are going to want to do.
Okay, so we have another question from Alan. It says, I have a 1956 2-door sedan, Bel Air, that I need to know where the holes go for the stainless.
If you're talking about side trim for like a new sheet metal panel, unfortunately Chevrolet never had an assembly manual or let's say a shop manual for the body, which would have been from Fisher. I'm not even sure when Fisher did finally do manuals for the bodies in the later years of Impalas. I'm not even sure if they had any measurements or patterns for that. Unfortunately, when replacing a undrilled quarter panel,
Fenders and doors.
Or even replacing a door or something, you may actually have to take the measurements off of somebody else's car. Because the only measurements they have in the assembly manual were for V8 emblems. Every car had holes for a crest emblem in the shape of a V to work with the V as well, but you had to drill the holes for the small crest emblem that went above that V. Other than that, I don't believe there's any other patterns or hole measurements or anything like that for the 56s, unfortunately.
Okay. This question is from Samantha. My father is installing leaf springs and he wants to flip them. There is no bushings pressed into the rear. Rather than shackles, can you use bolts, or is there a different way to mount the leaf springs when flipping them?
I've never heard of anybody flipping leaf springs before. I would imagine that would lower the car way too low, because we have lowered leaf springs that they take a little bit of the arc away and then they flip one of the eyes. I believe they flip the front eye instead of flipping the whole leaf spring. But flipping the whole leaf spring, that would definitely lower the car way too low. Because I know the D-arc springs, they're not even flat, and they lower the car. We have a set that will lower the car 4.5 inches. So I couldn't see, and I've never heard of anybody doing that before.
Okay, guys, please send in some questions. We're waiting for you. We're going to move on to some questions from a previous week, but we are live. If you have any questions for Frank, please send them in. We are reading them live for you. So we're going to go back to last week. This one is from David. I have a 1957 gas tank feeler check flapper valve that is bad. What is the easiest way to replace it, or do I really need the check valve in my 57?
Well, the check valve in the filler tube, right?
Correct.
So the filler tube check valve is an aftermarket part that somebody invented, and the whole point of it is all 57 owners should know. You fill up your gas tank, you take off from the gas station, take off from a light, the gas is going to wash up that filler tube and out the gas cap. I've had people ask me, why is my tail light lens starting to deteriorate? It cracked real easy on its own, and it's not that old. Well, I ask them, driver's side? Of course, it's always the driver's side. Gas is getting on it, and it'll even mess up the chrome on the tail light housing. So the flapper is a weighted flapper that allows the gas to go in through the filler tube, but not come back the other direction. You can even use it on 56s as well and 55s by splicing it in. But in order to, I think you said it was something's wrong with it.
He says it's deteriorated.
I don't know how it would be deteriorated. It's all made out of metal, unless you're getting a little moisture in there and it's getting rusty. On each side, there's rubber hoses that should be able to be replaced in order to put it in a filler tube. But the actual unit, if something's wrong with it, you may actually have to replace it.
Okay. Ruben says, what is the best power steering set for a Tri-5?
Well, sometimes it's a personal preference, but mine personal preference is the 500 steering box. I would say it's been over 10 years now that they finally came out with a box that is using the newest technology. The old school 605 box, the technology of that box was pretty poor. I've even been told by mechanics that when they were brand new in the Chevys, they were not that great. So the 500 box is the newest technology. It's internally a quicker ratio than the old 605, and it's I've been told that the workings inside the box are fairly close to a rack and pinion, and the design is also a design that's used in some race cars today on tracks, probably more like circle track cars and stuff. So yeah, I would go definitely with the 500 box, and there's a better method of getting things to fit with it.
Sort of a second part of that question. This is from David, and he goes, I have a big block on my 1955. What is the best power steering setup for the big block versus the small block? Well,
it's still going to be probably the 500 box. it could be really tight no matter what headers you're using. There is headers out there that will work. And that's all as long as you're not moving the motor too far forward. You gotta make sure the motor's sitting up high enough. You know, even some of the best motor mounts, if you don't put them in correctly, I've had even a personal friend put a set of motor mounts on a small block and didn't do them right, and it ended up putting the header tube too close to the 500 box when it should have had plenty of clearance. Big block, as long as it's a regular deck block too, because tall deck blocks will cause even more trouble. You just should make sure that the headers were designed for a power steering box. They have a better choice on that. And I'm sure still most of them were designed around the 605, not the 500. So it could still be tight, but as long as you don't have the header touching the box, making contact, and transferring heat, you should be okay. I've never heard of anybody boiling their power steering fluid because of the header being too close. Have anything else?
Okay, I have one from Mike. He says, I'm getting ready to finish up my car. Is it advisable to install headliner before the windshield and in the rear glass goes in, or does it matter?
Actually, it's going to mostly depend on who's doing the headliner. It's really the preference of the upholstery guy, because I've had a headliner put in, didn't want to attempt to do the big huge station wagon with all the bows, so my upholstery guy said he didn't care if the windshield was inside or out. Matter of fact, he didn't even care if there was new tack strip in it, because the glue that these upholstery shops are using is very high contact glue. It's very good stuff. So he was able to glue the header right up next to the windshield without getting glue everywhere. But then you got other upholstery guys, they prefer the window out, replace the tack strip. You have to have the windshield out to replace the tack strip. And then to get the staple gun up there without being shoved up against the glass, the window needs to be out. So yeah, some upholstery guys will want the windows to be out. To get the headliner in, then you can put the windows back in. But not too long ago, I went to an upholstery shop and installed front and back windows after they got a pretty high dollar headliner installed. So it's something, if you're gonna have an upholstery guy do, you wanna ask him, see what his preference is.
Other preference question is exhaust versus ram horns. What is better?
Which kind?
Exhaust versus ram horn manifolds. So exhaust manifolds versus ram horn manifolds.
Maybe you're talking maybe headers versus ram horns.
And this is Tim asking the question.
You know, some people, of course, back in the day, headers was made out of real thin tubing. They were noisier, really tin sounding, and made a difference between having a heavy cast manifold on there of any kind. I know that used to be a preference of some people. Exhaust manifolds, sometimes people do it for looks. They'd rather see headers in there. Now the headers are, of course, today are ceramic coated. Where back in the day they used to be chrome plated. They would turn all kinds of different colors. Chrome would start peeling, and then they would look ugly. Now the ram horns, yeah, they don't look so pretty either unless you have them ceramic coated. Then they could look pretty good. I've seen people go as far as die grinding the rough casting off of them and get them ceramic coated and can make them look pretty good. So even that's kind of a preference. As long as you go with 2-inch ram horns, those should fit next to like a 500 series power steering box. But if you go with the high horsepower 2.5-inch Corvette rams, I believe the flange is going to be just a hair too big up against the 500 box.
Perfect. There's been a lot of discussion of 3-piece versus smoothie. What's a better preference between the two?
On the bumpers, if you're running bumper guards, it really doesn't matter because the bumper guards on 55 and 56 bumpers at least are hiding the seam. You don't see the seam. If the way I used to put with people, Chevy didn't do a one piece for any other reason except for faster, quicker production. But I tell people that most of the cars came with three piece, and you think about it, if people were on the East Coast, if they were in a snowy or icy area, a lot of times cars skidded out of control and bump into things. It would be nice to be able to repair one side of your bumper instead of replacing the whole one-piece bumper. So the three-piece can be fixed or repaired easily back in the day. Today, I'm sure nobody cares about that. And then on the 57 bumpers, the one-piece looks a little neater. You don't have those big seams showing on each side of the car, each side of the bumper. That one, it's kind of more of a preference of looks on the 57, but the 5 and 6, it's hidden unless you get rid of the guards.
Okay. This message is from Gustavo. Gustavo says, I am installing LED taillights in the back of my car and also putting the halos in the front. Can I hook it up to my stock wiring kit, or what do I need to do to install LEDs in the front and LEDs in the back?
Yeah, the LED lighting is going to still utilize the stock wiring kit with the instructions. Depending on what brand, it'll tell you which wires to use to which wires on the LEDs. The most important thing is getting the right flasher, or your flashers are not going to work. You do have to have a low load electronic flasher that we sell for the LEDs. It's going to make sure, even if you change just the back and have the park lights and turn signals up front with regular bulbs, it still won't work. I've tried it before. Or even thinking maybe hazard lights. If you run hazard lights, all LED, it's still not a big enough load for a regular flasher. And you got to get that low load LED flasher. But yeah, you should be able to hook. Now the front halos, that's usually hooked up to a separate accessory wire, unless you want them to come on all the time with your headlights. Then you should be able to tap that into your headlight wire. Just remember, you got a high beam wire and a low beam wire, so if you put it in the low beam, as soon as you turn your high beams on, their halos are going to shut off. But you probably want to hook that up to a separate switch if you like, so you can turn them on and off when you want.
I think we got time for one last question. This question says, suspension upgrades. What is the different? What suspension upgrades do you prefer? Stock for a stock appearance, but also improves safety and performance.
Well, I've always said that a sway bar is probably one of the most important suspension upgrades on these cars. Kind of weird that they didn't put a sway bar at least up front when they were brand new. From what I understand, the only cars that got the front sway bar automatically was probably a police car or a taxi cab. So you do need to get the sway bar in there for sure. Disc brakes is a safety thing. Yeah, you can run disc brakes with stock wheels, and most people would never know they're even behind the wheels. Suspension arms, they do have an upper suspension arm that looks stock, that has 5 degrees extra caster. That is usually installed most of the time when you go with late model power steering. That's almost a must, is to get that extra caster. Other than that, those are probably the 3 most important things: getting your stock suspension and brakes set up, even if the car's stock.
All right. Guys, we want to say thank you again for watching. Tune in again next Friday, same time, 1 o'clock. If you have questions, you can keep sending them in for a couple of minutes and we'll print them out and we'll answer them on next week's. But just remember to tune in and type in your questions and we'll get them answered as fast as we can. Thank you again. Just to give you a heads up, our showroom is now open again. We're open from 7 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon. Monday through Friday, we are still closed on Saturdays. But thank you again for tuning in and we'll see you next week.